Hello, my name is Sally Daly and I'm a recovering resettlement worker. So just to acknowledge, I'm actually wearing two hats today. I work part-time for the National Youth Council and my colleague Anne Walsh is here. And just to pick up, Sean, on something that you said there, I think just to acknowledge the extraordinary challenge of resettlement work, the logistical operation that it is in, and I know UNHCR are here in the room as well, in getting people from the context within which they are displaced to Ireland. And we know that, for instance, housing is one of the big blocks in terms of moving people's lives along. So myself and my colleague Anne have been actually talking with OPMI about a more strategic role for the youth sector in responding to resettlement. And OPMI are definitely open to those conversations, just to acknowledge that. Then separate to that, I also work as a consultant, and I do work on diversity and inclusion. Now, I'm a little bit heartbroken because up to yesterday, Linda and Hoden were going to be here with me today. The most recent project I've been working on is in Wicklow, in Arklow actually, following a resettlement in 2013 of 6 Somali families. It was found that there was a gap in service responses in the intervening years. So they wanted to map that response. They wanted to build the capacity of the families to engage in a response, and they also wanted to set up an interagency response. So one of the things we did is we held a workshop with Springboard, the local family and child service, and the Vault, and this is one of the pieces of art that was produced. So this is very much, what I'm talking about today is very much about children and young people. In fact, in the context of Wicklow, 70% of the people, the families, are under the age of 22. And I know that, in fact, the Irish policy is it favours family resettlement, so that it really is an issue. The whole context of better outcomes, brighter futures is a real context for this work. The Children's First policy, in case anybody doesn't know it, also known as Bob F. Let's get this thing. Just to acknowledge, in the Wicklow piece of work, it was commissioned by the Citizens Information Service, SIPC and the LCDC and Wicklow County Council, and paid for by the Department of Justice and the Citizens Information. So, really the work has involved mapping the community needs with the parents, with the adults. And that was really a way so that the project was led by people's experiences and not led by any other agenda. So we literally did a community mapping project with Google Maps, which allows you to identify services and service gaps. And then because of the number of young people in the ages of 13 to 22, we did education workshops in partnership with the Vault, East Wicklow Youth Service. And they were really important because we were able to talk about a wider definition of intelligence than is allowed in an academic context, and also the resilience of these young people in their strategies, in their own strategies, in their countries of origin, and in transit, and in being in Ireland, and how they were responding to the education experience. So we did workshops on informal education, non-formal education, and formal education, just to kind of draw out their strategies. So this is all in the report, which is going to be launched on the 5th of November. And then for the small children, as you saw at the start, we had the painting workshops, and that wasn't to actually do any kind of psychosocial analysis. It was literally just to have their voices represented in this report, and also to have the parents to support them in building a relationship, and with the service, the key service in the area. So engagement with key services also was part of the report to assess service delivery and engagement. And we also did some one-to-one sessions to develop case studies. So it was very much a participative and inclusive approach in compliance with BOBF, the Local Economic Community Plan, the Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme, and SIPC objectives. Now, I'd imagine everybody in the room knows most of those acronyms, but if you don't, SICAP is a really important part of this conversation because it is the National Social Inclusion Community Activation Programme that is delivered in each county through the Local Community Development Committee. So, part of that's actually just taken from the workshop we did with the children. And it was really important because for some of those children, it was the first time that they actually had been in that service, and it was the first time the service had actually met those children. So as I say, there was a service gap following the initial resettlement, and the services are now very keen to engage, and they're very much stepping up to their role. What we did was, this is part of the human rights context, which, I think in terms of kind of an education piece, it's really important to establish the human rights context of this work, particularly for local communities who might not have a specific understanding. So as part of the mapping, we developed the community mapping actually as panels, as graphic panels, and they're in the report, because also, obviously, a lot of us respond to visuals. We all get reports with lots and lots of text. We wanted this report to be read, so we wanted it to have some visual resonance. So here, and I think one of the big points there for me is that over 2 million people left Ireland because of the Great Famine, equal to a quarter of the total population of the country. Over 70% travelled on boats across the Atlantic Ocean to America. Now, in fairness, that's a point that Trócaire make actually in their infographic. We've stolen it and we've acknowledged that. And separately also, the family is very important to Somalis. In 2015, 23% of Somalis' GDP came from displaced Somalis. So it's sending money to relatives to help with basic necessities. Just in terms of the mapping, some of the key things that came out around employment and education, the whole thing about really the need for people to have very specific kinds of support, which weren't in place. When I talk about resettlement, I include family reunification, because they go hand in hand. There is no resettlement without family reunification. At the back of the report, you'll see that there's a lot of references. This has been studied well, both in Ireland by NGOs and also in the UK, the British Red Cross. They've really shown how families don't really settle until family members are safe and well. And that is a constant issue. It holds back prospects around education and employment, for instance, as well, because people are constantly worried about their loved ones. So, there are some key issues around employment and education. The specific responses that young people need are actually evident in the fact that some young people, Leonie has already said it, they've had a real break in their education experience. Some young people have never had a formal education experience. Again, going back to Bob F talks about the outcome for a child is directly related to the mother's own educational background and their socioeconomic status. So that is really important when you talk about a country that's had 2.5 decades of war. So that for me was one of the big things in this project, actually. And it's obviously the reason we did specific work with the young people on their strategies in formal and non-formal education. They have such a keen intelligence. It's absolutely shining out. But it's just that the way they're being responded to is not meeting their needs. Now, I think Jessica is talking tomorrow from the Separated Children's Unit. They've done some brilliant work on kind of marrying literacy responses, which are modelled on the adult literacy system within Ireland, with youth work. I'm a big fan of youth work. I think it is a site of social change. It is where things happen, things can get done, where policy change can happen. The homework supports, Bob F., again, the issue of the mother is so important, where all of these mothers, I think with one exception, had no access to formal education. It isn't the lack of willingness to support the children, it's the lack of capacity in a new curriculum, a new environment. So the desire for language training for all the adults was linked to job search. The job search thing too is really important, going back to family. Everybody feels a real sense of responsibility around your family, whether they're living in Wicklow or living in Ethiopia or in Somalia. The sense of responsibility to actually progress your life, get a job and start paying back into your family. So the current DESP Labour Market Activation Programme definitely wasn't supporting people with skills development. There have been some innovative projects now that are developing, which actually mentoring is key to those projects, job placement, work experience, also supporting employers to understand the context, what it means, the human rights context, what it means to be a refugee. And also, in terms of progression for young people, it's essential to work closely with, in this context, the local ETB and the local youth service to work together in progressing outcomes for young people. One of the young women she wants to be a doctor, She taught herself to read. Both her parents were dead. She found one book in her grandmother's house. She taught herself to read Somali. She then taught her siblings to read. At that point, her cousin actually managed to get her and her two siblings to come to Addis in Ethiopia. He could only afford to send one of them to school. She was the one who went because she was so keen to learn. And then she kept teaching her siblings. When she came to Ireland, she was put into the Irish education system and delighted to be there. But despite her earnest efforts and her keen intelligence, it's not meeting her needs because her needs are much greater than the current system can accommodate. So, but she's a very inspiring young woman and she is determined to be a doctor. So, it's about sort of seeing her and seeing her as the person that she is. And in terms of health and well-being, Leonie has discussed that, so I mightn't spend too long on that. But there are some very specific needs, definitely psychosocial needs. All of the mothers would be concerned for the well-being of their children. And of course, they themselves are displacing their own mental health needs in that. They're prioritising the needs of their children. And things like anger and frustration, trauma, sleeplessness. In the case studies in the report, they all talk about trauma, but not explicitly. It's sort of just part of the casual kind of story around people's experiences. And then in navigating the kind of life transition into Ireland, the kind of sense of culture shock and how that plays out over time. But there's no way to actually talk about that because you just get on with your life, you just adapt, right? But the Vault have been such a key service for supporting people to transition. I'll talk about that again in a sec. So again, all this is available in the report, and it's about National Outcome 3, Safe and Protected from Harm, and also the Healthy Ireland Strategy, which is all relevant to the work that's going on here. So I'm not, again, going to talk too much about the health issues. It's very mixed, really. In fairness, we know that GP services are oversubscribed as it is. The Citizens Information Service in Arklow has been absolutely a key intermediary for the well-being of these families, especially outside of an interagency context, which stopped happening in 2015. The Citizens Information and the Vault and the local ETB have been really the key intermediaries in supporting families to progress their lives. And just to say there is a model in the HSC South East, which is they've just recently advertised for the position of intercultural health worker, and I'm definitely recommending that to happen in the Wicklow area because the needs are complex. And I mean, ideally, you'd love there to be an ongoing resettlement worker and other key positions, but it's just, for me, that is one of the really key issues that has to be addressed. And just to acknowledge, the College of Psychiatrists of Ireland in 2017 are acknowledging the significance of mental health needs of refugees needs to be addressed in coordinated, culturally sensitive and appropriately resourced manner. So they're calling for actually a specific area of the HSC to be set up. As I say, this will all be in the report. Supporting family a priority. It's an everyday part of people's lives. One of the girls, she has a WhatsApp video call with her brother every single day in Addis, and he's, I think, her junior by about 3 years. And so he's very much living with her in Ireland. He's very much present in her life. The distance is very hard. Family reunification applications are ongoing. Family reunification is a complex and a very arduous application process. The Citizens Information have been supporting with those applications. And then the key piece around transition support for families post-reunification. All the services will say that the biggest challenge for them is not knowing that family members are coming, and therefore not being able to prepare a response. So in terms of one of the recommendations in the report is that family reunification is more linked in to key services so that services can actually respond as opposed to being unprepared when somebody turns up at the door. Culture, religion and belonging. I mean, I suppose this, and sort of in all of my work, this is one of the issues that I think is like what anchors us in life, what grounds us in our being, in our sense of self, in our sense of who we are, what matters to us as people. And the City of Dublin ETB, youth, so Jessica I think is talking tomorrow, Youth and Education Service for Refugees and Migrants, in a report in 2013 they identified that religion can be an extremely important issue for young refugees. The relationship with God is the one relationship that has remained constant. And it's so evident in the work. Actually, as I say, I'm a recovering resettlement worker from Tipperary, but I'm doing ongoing support work with those families, and the relationship with God is a key relationship that endures. I personally meditate every day. I'm not religious, but that's how I kind of help to anchor myself, so I can relate to that. So yeah, again, so some really great stuff happening, and I must keep reminding myself to say that, actually, because in Arklow, Glenard Community College is a Desh school, and they run the Yellow Flag programme, and there's a fabulous the day of the Yellow Flag. It was such a beautiful day where people could actually go and show the colours of their culture and literally be very proud to announce, okay, this is who I am, actually. This is who I am. And, every day I can't wear this clothes in school, but today I can. But just to go back to the culture bit, so much there, really. Duxie is the Somali is a school for learning the Quran in Somali. And Duxie is really important. Duxie happens at home. It also happens in the mosque. But it's a central thing. It's like, and it's when you talk to somebody about it, when you mine down into it, people talk about faith, about values, about being a good person, learning like who you are as a person, and it's really important for parents to teach that to their children. It's kind of foundational. It's what anchors us in our being. I don't know if anybody knows Brené Brown's work. Does anybody? Yeah. What is the difference between fitting in and belonging? She really talks about belonging. This is who I am, or this is what I have to change to be accepted, is the fitting in bit. And Rebecca Hersher talks about what cultural traditions get broken down. When cultural traditions get broken down, young people don't know who they are, who they can be. Celebrating differences support that sense of belonging. In fairness, the migrant integration strategy absolutely acknowledges that integration is something that you have to, have I got the quote there? Oh yeah, defined in current Irish policy as the ability to participate to the extent that a person needs and wishes in all of the major components of society without having to relinquish his or her own cultural identity. So that is, the Department of Justice are absolutely acknowledging the importance of that. But for me, it's very much manifest in the work that the Crosscare, the Vault are doing in Wicklow. So just then to go on to that, do I have that quote there? Oh yeah. So this is just basically a quote from Crosscare, from the Vault. There were 6 children from 18 to 10, and we could not communicate. We found that music was a really simple, easy way. So we went into the room with percussion instruments, and one of our volunteers here played tin whistle and bowron. So we started with just one beat and asked them to copy, and it just worked. They were smiling, they were expressing themselves with their dance. We were able to have that interaction without language. We prioritised children at risk, and these were definitely in that category, but we wanted it to do it properly, and none of us knew about their culture, their background, or their religion, to confidently say, oh, we can support these children. So Crosscare had the Migrant Project in Dublin. They have a Somali clinic once a week on rights and entitlements, and some of the parents had already used the service. We wanted to be respectful to make sure the young people felt included, but certainly it was a reaction rather than anything planned. We had no warning they were coming, and we had no time to plan. It was just a phone call from the community worker in the partnership, who had been the former resettlement worker, to say that they had arrived and could we offer some support. We sat down and used Google Translate, which was not perfect, but we made it work. A couple of our sessions were just sitting at the computer, typing out a word. It was a good way to build the relationship. We also found that food worked really well, bringing young people to the shop for food they wanted, building the relationship all the time, and that's it. I mean, any of us who are involved in community and youth work, you know it's all about relationships, relationships, relationships. It's about spending the time to get to know the person and to build the trust with that person. And actually, Linda and Hodan, if they had been here, you have to imagine, you can see the trust that's there and what that allows. They're both what I call community engineers. They're bridge builders within their community, which actually facilitates bridge building outside of that community. So they're brokers, and they create openings and they create change. 2 really inspiring women. You'll have to believe me. So yeah, this is actually, the Vault brought 11 of the young Somali people to the President's Garden Party this summer in June. Amazing day. It was like one of those days that you couldn't have, I don't know, written it. The sun was shining, everything was sparkling. There were, of course, string quartets in the garden. There were horses running in the paddock. There were, lavender corridors. It was like kind of an Alice in Wonderland day. I kept kind of going, oh, this is insane. And they loved it. And one of the girls, she was so determined to get her own photograph with the president. So she basically stalked his entourage until she got her own photograph. It was an amazing... And they were so happy to be there that day. It meant an awful lot to them. And also, importantly, a lot of community work and youth work that happens, it doesn't get acknowledged. So it was so important that the Vault were there that day as well, so that they were seen for the work that they're doing and acknowledged. Importantly, I don't know if you're aware of this report, probably you are, it's from the Growing Up in Ireland survey, the experiences of migrant children in Ireland in cherishing all the children equally, from the ESRI Institute. And basically it talks about social interaction provides a variety of protective functions, a sense of belonging, emotional support, a source of information. Although this is important for all individuals in society, the protective functions provided by social interaction are of particular importance for newly arrived migrant families and their children. And that also talks about this particular work, this survey is done for migrant children, but it does not include refugee children. It also does not include children who are homeless. And actually that's one of the recommendations in the report, and I think you also alluded to that, Leonie, that we need definitely evaluations that are available for everyone to analyse, and we also need young refugee children to be included in longitudinal analysis around their social, educational and other outcomes, because I'd be quite concerned that that's not being captured at the moment. Oh yeah, and just to say, collaborative work, I mean, there's some fantastic collaborative work happening, for instance, in Arklow. I suppose the thing about it is, when it doesn't have an interagency context overseeing it, that would be my concern, that it's sort of ad hoc and therefore potentially not, sustainable. So how do we make this sustainable and something that endures, especially where there's really excellent practice happening? And in fairness, again, to acknowledge that the Department of Justice have partly funded this report. So I know the Department of Justice are very interested as well in kind of trying to advance these issues. They're very committed to integration. So let me just see, supporting with, yeah. Okay, so just one of the big things there for the Vault is that piece around supporting the young people to progress out of precarious education into training that actually is realistic for them to achieve outcomes in their lives, because all of them have that objective. The last piece then is the policy context for the work. So the policy context for the work is absolutely, it's the migrant integration strategy. Absolutely, it's the intercultural education strategy, the International Protection Act, there's also the intercultural health. That's actually an old graphic, but I'll have to update that. Then the local economic community plan is such an important piece of policy work in alliance with the migrant integration strategy. And then better outcomes, brighter futures is another key piece of work in the context of resettlement. Because as I said in the beginning, Ireland favours families, which of course the implication is children, and therefore we need to start seeing these projects in that context. There is a cross-departmental framework in Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, and the areas of responsibility are outlined there. So across the 6 transformational goals and the 5 better outcomes, there are areas of responsibility cross-departmental. And it's about situating resettlement integration work within that context. And actually that's what we were doing in the report in Wicklow. And I must say it was a very collaborative report. The way I work is very participative. And in terms of the LCDC, the council, the citizens' information, the families, the services, it was very participative. And when you kind of draw out, and actually Leonie, your presentation is really helpful to me because you really drew out some of the kind of, you mined into some of the details of people's lived experience. And they are all situated under the Bob F framework, So it's about that cross-departmental piece. But yeah, just that piece around, I suppose, again, within the Bob F framework, within the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, young people are 0 to the age of 24. And that's also kind of in compliance with sort of the youth sector approach. One of the challenges is that, again, I think that the challenge for resettlement is a huge challenge. But under the Department of Justice understanding, there tends to be a binary between adults and minors, whereas the Department of Children and Youth Affairs have a broader inclusive kind of framing. So the 0 to 26 is really important. Okay.
Sorry.
Remind me tomorrow.
Yes, definitely. Next week, please. Remind me next week.
Sorry about that. So that's important. So that's also why the Bob F framework is so important, because so many of the children who are in kind of crisis, the young people, are in those ages of 16 to 24. especially where they've had broken education or a lack of formal education. How do we best serve their needs in terms of moving them forward? The good work. I want to just acknowledge SIPSI's role, actually, SIPSI's current and emerging role in this context. I know Fionnuala Curry, who is the chair of SIPSI in Wicklow, who I've been working very closely with. She was here yesterday, but she couldn't be here today. SIPSI basically so out of this report, and actually it actually was an idea coming into the report that the SIPSI would set up a subcommittee on refugees and integration. And on that, there'll be one of the young Somali, one of the girls, but mentored by the Vault Youth Service, because we know that mentoring is a great concept in theory, but it doesn't always actually follow through unless somebody is literally supported in that role. So the Vault will support one of the girls onto the SIPSI committee, and also one of the mothers will be there, because it's important to represent all of the younger children as well. So that committee is being set up, and I'm very hopeful for that. And it's the interagency piece which is really important. And there is commitment from the LCDC on that. There is commitment across the Wicklow County Council on that. So there is really an identified understanding on the need for interagency collaboration going forward. Some of the other recommendations include the LCDCs, the local community development committees. They all have a social inclusion pillar, but whether that actually is effective in delivering on social inclusion across the areas would be questionable. What Carlow have done actually is Carlow have set up a subcommittee on social inclusion at their LCDC. And they say that was an effective way for them to actually bring the resettlement work into the LCDC, because it's a very busy space, obviously. It's a very busy space, and people are very committed around that table. But it's just to get the resettlement issues actually embedded into the work. And also just to acknowledge, SIPSI in Cork have been funding Youth Work Cork. Oh, thank you. Sorry, Hilary, for the trauma. SIPSI in Cork have been funding, good practice here, have been funding Youth Work Ireland Cork to support Syrian refugees in one particular area. Again, I mean, that's brilliant work that they're doing. They've got a brilliant youth worker in place doing that work. Just to say then, Youth Work Tipperary leveraged SICAP funding from the local partnership in the years 2016 to 2018 inclusive to run homework clubs. What's important about that is that the SICAP money is a sustainable social inclusion fund, and that's important because it's about situating this work in the context of that kind of funding. It's allowed Youth Work Tipperary to build relationships with the young people and their parents over time. And that's, again, going back to the relationships. Again, I've mentioned the City of Dublin work already, which is really important work. And then Carlow Regional Youth Service, a really excellent project. In fact, there are 3 evaluations available of that by Aoife Titley, and they're available online, actually. And their kind of evaluations run out over 3 years of the project. So part of the resettlement programme, they established an after-school support for the post-primary students, recognising how they were flailing in the kind of formal education context. So just to go back to the recommendations, interagency commitment, absolutely key. Subcommittee, I've said this already, youth sector, a key part of resettlement interagency. But as I say, in fairness, I think OPMI are acknowledging that. And it is such a huge logistical exercise, the whole resettlement project. Broad representation of community and voluntary sector is also key. Again, going back to the Carlow project that Aoife Titley reported on, fantastic range of representation at that table. And the effect has been a more long-term engaged involvement in integration. Risk of social exclusion is very high. And as part of a long-term view on resettlement concerning the Irish Refugee Protection Programme, again, that point about researching refugee children. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to ask you to look at, actually, Hilary, would you mind? Oh no, don't do it yet, actually. This is the last thing I wanted you to look at. What does anybody see in this image? Does anything stand out to you? Anything that you connect with? Huh?
It's all the same person.
Yeah. But any of the actions that he's doing?
Lots of dabbing.
That's absolutely.
Most common one, they're not playing football.
Yeah. Did anyone see him picking his nose? Fidget spinner. It's a bit dated now, actually. Imagine fidget spinners were here for such a short time. This is a project that we worked on. So, because the youth service had delivered the homework club, they were able to build a relationship. And out of that, we were able to do this photo story project with 15 young people from Syria in Tipperary. And it was really about, for me, it goes back to the point of belonging, what it means to belong. This is who I am. And this is Saeed's story. And it's very, as you can see, he's got a lot going on. He's a very dynamic young person. I think he's 12 now. So he plays football with his mates every day. And actually, could I have a volunteer to read out his story?
My dream is to play soccer for Man United. I was only 4 when we left Syria for Jordan, but I do remember kicking the ball in Syria. Now I have friends in my estate and I play soccer with them. The aunt of my friend has brought me to play soccer in a club with him. It's not far from here. I want to play county soccer and play for England, maybe Turkey. Paul Pogba, he brought Dad to England, is my favourite player with Man U. He's a great player, the best after Suarez, and he is a Muslim too. I can play with him on his team. I think I will be scouted from St Kevin's to play with County Tipperary, or maybe Shamrock Rovers Dublin, or Galway United. When I am a famous soccer player, and I can live anywhere in the world, I will live in Man United. The scout came to the club and I scored 5 goals in 15 to 20 minutes. He said it was his first time there, but if he came again, I might get scouted with my friend.
That's it, great, yeah. That's just Saeed. He was 11 when he wrote that. He's very ambitious. He'd only been in the country 2 years and he already knew all the soccer clubs, including Shamrock Rovers. So he's going places. But for him, Pogba, as a Muslim player, is really important. He feels the connection there. And so I just wanted to kind of leave you up with Saeed's story, basically. I hope I have enough copies. I might not have, but if you work with somebody else in an agency, maybe you could share the copy. And just to say, I'll just give you the address of Deirdre in Wicklow. If you're interested in a copy of the report, hopefully it's on this version. Deirdre Whitfield at Wicklow Coco. Oh, maybe I didn't put it in. Sorry, it's not on that version. But yeah, so Deirdre Whitfield at Wicklow County Council, her email, Deirdre Whitfield at Wicklow Coco. She'll have a copy from the 5th of November, the report will be launched. And so that Saeed story is part of a resource, a teaching and learning resource for youth and community workers to just kind of break down the barriers. There is a reality too of kind of having to challenge Islamophobia. And so this is about meeting 15 young people where they're at, hearing their stories and making connections. So I think that's it.